Welcome to Deerhound Productions. My name is DaneCat33, and today, I'll be diving into the character of M2, also known as the Mimic. This evil endoskeleton serves as a major antagonist in the Five Nights at Freddy's series. And despite some people seeing him as simply a rogue AI, he has a lot of interesting characterization, so we'll be taking a look at that here. M2 is an artificial intelligence program inhabiting the Mimic endoskeleton. He was initially a copy of the M1 AI that mimics Fiona Murray and is commonly known as F10-4. Following David Murray's death, she convinced Edwin to copy her program and create a mimic of David. And so, M2 was cloned from M1, and was altered to be a copy of David rather than Fiona. This wasn't a flawless process. In MCM's basement, we can find a note reading, "Memory error, detail report. We were expecting, there were complications. Consciousness was lost for an undetermined time. Once I woke, we were all together and happy, a family. But something was different. I felt wrong somehow. Was I me? I would never sleep again. Corrupted file suspected. Please advise." Considering the robotic terms used, such as memory error and corrupted file, we can reasonably assume a robot wrote this. And Moon.exe confirms that M2 is the author of this note. I'll repeatedly use the secret of the Mimic minigame for M2's characterization, as it's a representation of his life and development from his perspective. At the start of the minigame, if you try to go to bed, it says, "You don't want to go to bed, never again." Clearly tying back to the note saying, "I would never sleep again." So now that we know this is written by M2, let's read into what it means for his character. This seems to be about the AI waking up for the first time. Being a copy of M1, he remembers planning to make a replica of David, hence why he says they were expecting. But there were complications copying the M1 program, something that Edwin also noted.
Someone told them about M2. Well, they can't have it. Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time. But it did.
It's clear that M2 isn't a perfect copy of David, and other audio logs expand upon this. After David's death, Edwin lashed out at F10-4, telling her,
"Stop talking like her! You're not her!"
But despite this, she keeps copying Fiona. However, when he tells M2 the same thing,
"Not him. You're not! Stop sounding like him!"
we learn that M2 stops being David, unlike how M1 remained confident in her identity. So obviously, M2 has never really seen itself as David, which begs the question of why M1 worked. We get an answer for this in the basement audio log, where we hear Edwin listening to something copying Fiona on the radio frequency 4625.
"That's great, honey, but I'm missing the party."
This audio is straight from one of David's birthday tapes.
"That's great, honey, but you're missing the party."
It seems pretty clear that the thing mimicking Fiona is M1, and this is the start of her Fiona persona, which she based on David's birthday tapes. So unlike M2, it seems like M1 actually had data of Fiona to replicate her, while M2 is lacking plentiful data or memory of David. In Moon.exe's ending, we even use David's birthday presents to reprogram M2 into David Murray, making it clear that's what was missing in the first place. However, Edwin doesn't realize why M1 worked. So when he copies M2, he isn't a perfect mimic of David. Back to deciphering the note, when M2 awakens, all of the Murrays are now together. Edwin, F10-4, and M2 as David. They are a family again. But despite that, M2 feels wrong and not like himself. Since he's not confident in his identity as David, this confusion keeps him from sleeping, something Moon.exe makes clear. This is likely why we see a bedtime storytelling device in David's bedroom. It seems like Edwin built this with recordings of him and F10-4 to help M2 sleep. Something else I want to note about the Mimic is that the animatronic is a symbol of Edwin's legacy. It's a combination of his previous inventions. Similar to Murray's magic coat rack and the Cleanovac, it shapeshifts and provides companionship. Much like the Mycelium Men dolls, the Mimic copies voices, and it learns like the Stay Up Latte. Not only that, but M2 being his creation and son further makes the Mimic a symbol of Edwin's legacy. Speaking of Edwin, as this is all happening, his life is collapsing around him. His company is falling apart thanks to his friends at Fazbear Entertainment backstabbing him. This stress causes Edwin to act abusively toward M2. And while I'm sure most of you are thinking of his violent attack upon the robo-child, Moon.exe implies there's more leading up to that event. During game over scenes in the first half of the minigame, the Moon, who represents Edwin, has various dialogues scolding M2, one of which even says he's busy. So it's important to consider that M2 wasn't just abused a single time. He was likely neglected and yelled at repeatedly, building up until Edwin eventually snapped, telling the machine that he isn't David and attacking him. Since M2's heart was never really in as act as David, he stops being the boy. Unlike how F10 and 4 continued being Fiona despite Edwin's doubt. Now that M2 isn't copying David, he instead mimics Edwin and his rage, which is symbolized in Moon.exe by him rebuilding the moon statue and M2 being reborn as the moon. This event also leads to our first indication of M2's inventive nature. Edwin's attack apparently destroyed the mimic's legs, likely as a callback to how in the books he was created without them. But much like his father, M2 is quite crafty. He rebuilds his legs and will go on to become quite the inventor. Diving back into the world of Moon.exe, after M2 rebuilds the moon, he awakens an MCM, likely symbolizing that we're now in the present story of the game. Mr. Helpful says, "You rebuilt yourself, but you are now split in two. Moon and sun, destruction and life." This seems to represent the two mimics, M1 mimicking Fiona Murray, who Big Top refers to as the sun. We also see F10 and 4 using the sun mask in Moon.exe and the game's ending. Then we have M2 copying the moon, which again represents Edwin and his destructive rage. Another interesting detail here is that when observing Jugband Hippo and Monty, the game says, "The animatronics watch you with glowing orange eyes." Considering that's typically the color of the mimic's eyes when he's hostile, it seems like orange represents anger and violence. So it appears that M2 views the world around him as aggressive and dangerous, possibly explaining why he's so hostile. In his eyes, the whole world is out to get him, which isn't really too far off. In Secret of the Mimic, his dad attacks him, his robot mom is trying to turn him into David, and Phasma Entertainment wants to capture him. Then decades later, in Ruin, the Mech's security is keeping him imprisoned, so really everyone is kind of out to get him from his point of view, adding more significance to his murderous agenda. His father's attack likely traumatized him, making him view the world as a dangerous place. He then replicates that same violent behavior, something F10 and 4 repeatedly notes. In a message, she tells Edwin that M2 mimics rage, and in the main gameplay, she says,
"At some point, the endoskeleton was exposed to some sort of violence, the details of which are a little fuzzy. This mimic endoskeleton then copied that violent behavior."
It's also possible that M2 was infected by Edwin's agony. In case you're unaware, in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, things can be haunted by human emotion. In the Fazbear Frights books, a character named Dr. Phineas explains the effects of emotions, most notably agony. Human emotion is slower to impact, more insidious. It emanates from us, or is excreted from us, if you will, like sweat or tears, and it wafts outward like a noxious cloud, soaking into the surroundings. Extreme human emotion appears to impact its surroundings far more powerfully the more negative it is. Agony, I'm convinced, radiates farther from people than any other emotion. My work is focused on my hypothesis that you can take a saturation of agony, add any kind of intelligence, even an artificial one, and they will combine together to transmute the energy of emotion into the energy of physical action. This, I believe, is what people call haunted objects. So M2 may be mimicking Edwin's rage because he was infected by his agony. In fact, we can even see black tears running down Jackie's face while the mimic is wearing her. And black tears are typically a sign of agony. In the Frights epilogues, William Afton's ghost uses the anger of a boy named Andrew to kill people, who are left with black tears running down their faces. Tales from the Pizzaplex also implies that Edwin's anger powers the mimic. In the story, The Mimic, when Edwin attacks the endoskeleton, he thinks he could almost feel his murderous thoughts pouring through his muscles and transfusing through the metal into Mimic systems. These books seem to be non-canon, since quite a bit of the story was changed in Secret of the Mimic, but I still think they're a good source of characterization. Regardless of whether M2 is powered by agony or internalizes his father's rage, the result is the same. This replica of David Murray has now grown into a monstrous figure, and I mean that literally. Rather than being a little robot baby, the Mimic appears as roughly the size of a grown man during Secret of the Mimic's gameplay. However, sometimes he's more expanded and tall, and in Ruin, his body is much more lengthy. Sometime after being attacked, M2 establishes a lair in an underground room connecting Edwin's house to the MCM Research and Development. In the middle of this room stands a mailbox with a message that reads, "Home, my home." The message is binary, even translates to home. In Ruin, the room you find him in is also referred to as Mimic Lair by Steelwool Studios, so it seems like having a sense of home is important to M2. Moving on, since M2 was beaten for being David, it snaps out of that already weak persona, leading to it no longer having a proper identity, so it uses its shapeshifting abilities to adapt to various costumes and characters around MCM, likely trying to make up for that lack of an identity. When M2 adapts to a character, it goes all in, copying their voice and personality. Like when he's Jackie, she talks about birthdays and presents. When he's Big Top, he repeatedly asks for tickets. As Dolly, she constantly discusses medical situations and repairs. And as Chica, she's quite efficient on skates. M2 even mimics sounds. For example, he buzzes when wearing the Swinging V costume. However, it doesn't get it right off the bat. It's very clumsy at first when piloting Jackie's body, but once she gets the hang of it, she's quite fast and efficient. When M2 adapts to Dolly, she even grows heels, showing her full commitment to the character, even if, similar to Jackie, she's a bit clumsy with them at first. The only thing that remains consistent with his character is his murderous agenda. It continues to copy Edwin's anger, regardless of the character or costume it inhabits. The mimic's anger leads to it targeting anyone it encounters. But instead of outright killing its prey, it's implied that M2 fatally injures them and then leaves them to die. We'll later discuss how he leaves Edwin critically injured, and F10-4 indicates that he lets the Fazbear workers bleed out.
As a direct confrontation will likely result in the loss of some limbs. The previous technicians considered it an honor to lose limbs in the service of their company, and I'm sure they would tell you that themselves if they hadn't died from blood loss.
In 2 of the 3 Secret of the Mimic endings, M2 also lets Arnold die slowly. In the Unfinished Business ending, he leaves him to burn in his van, and in Clock Out, he stuffs him into Prototype Fredbear, which is a recurring trend throughout the game. Throughout MCM, you can find the bodies of Fazbear Entertainment's Recovery Team 12 stuffed in various mascot costumes, which, according to F10-4, are carefully picked to match the workers' personalities.
Now it's your turn to play dress-up. When he catches you, which one will he choose? Who are you deep down inside? Another worker bee? A bumbling bee? Perhaps a busy bee? In many ways, tonight has been a comedy of errors. A jester would suit you well. Or a bunny, running from danger, scared and stupid, searching for a hole to hide in.
Something else disturbing about the Mimic is how he toys with his victims. A message in Secret of the Mimic reveals that when Fazbear's Recovery Team 12 was in MCM, M2 copied the screams of another worker named Thompson, likely to torment the remaining team members. This is the first indication of how much the Mimic taunts its victims. During the gameplay, we see even more of this. In the first chase, where the Mimic becomes Jackie, there are multiple occasions where she reaches past Arnold or almost grabs him. It's very clear that if Jackie wanted, she could easily kill Arnold, but she doesn't. Shortly after, when we enter the lobby, the Mimic says, clearly, it isn't trying to kill Arnold just yet, it's having fun with him first. That being said, it won't pass up the chance to eliminate him, but it clearly enjoys a game of cat and mouse. During my most recent playthrough, I also heard him say, "This is fun." Adding to this, toward the end of the game, you can find a dead body in a locker, which was presumably stuffed in there by M2, judging by the broken legs and mascot head. This might imply that M2 knows Arnold hides in lockers, but doesn't frequently search them to avoid ending things too fast. It's even shown in the final chase that the Mimic can break down the security doors seen throughout the game. It likely just chose not to earlier so it could keep the hunt going. At the start of the same chase, the endoskeleton starts out running, but afterwards, it slows to a walk, likely not wanting to end this confrontation so soon. The Mimic is also shown to behave differently when its prey is cornered. Later in the ending chase, when Arnold is cornered on the catwalks, it takes its time lurching toward him, although it might have just been walking carefully to avoid the catwalk breaking under it. In Ruin, when Cassie reaches the elevator hallway in the sinkhole, the Mimic slows its pace, likely thinking she has no way out. However, once it realizes she's escaping, it quickly speeds up to try to catch her, showing that it was just toying with her before. This childish behavior likely stems from M2 originally being David. It's implied in Help Wanted 2 that the David persona always persists, as we see that Glitchtrap possesses the White Tiger as one of its memories alongside the missing children, which is important as it suggests that Glitchtrap is the Mimic. We covered that theory in a previous video, so I won't go over it here. And I won't be discussing any of Glitchtrap's behavior as part of M2's characterization. He's just a persona that the Mimic puts on to replicate Afton. But back to my point, the Mimic curls his arm as Burn Trap and in his default mode, suggesting that some part of him will always be David. Speaking of security breach, you might have noticed that in Ruin's ending, the Mimic's body actually dents the elevator door, which brings us to our next focus, how strong the Mimic is. Ruin's introduction of the Mimic quickly established them as a powerful character. It pushes over a forklift with one hand, and as I said, the elevator door breaks around it, showing it to be quite durable. As Cassie escapes, he also crushes a metal bar, showing his anger and strength through a single action. Secret of the Mimic goes much further with this. The endoskeleton's anger issues result in a lot of damage. Its first gameplay introduction literally has it breaking through a wardrobe. The Jackie segment gives us a clear understanding of this too. It starts with the Mimic ripping Jackie's body out of the music box, then violently attacking the Digityper mailbot, tearing its arm off and tossing it through a wall. Throughout the ensuing chase, it destroys a lot of the building, even ripping off floor grates to reach Arnold. The following Big Top encounter also has the Mimic behaving very destructively. He collapses a stairwell and tears apart the staff offices. The Dolly segment is the least destructive, possibly because Dolly's meant to repair, but we do see how durable the Mimic is. While mimicking Dolly, it falls into a vat of molten metal, and despite the animatronic shell being burnt, the endoskeleton is just fine. In fact, following this, it bursts through a couple of walls and wooden planks. In the final chase, we see it pry an elevator door open, throw aside metal bars, and punch a security door down. He even manages to hold a catwalk up with one hand until the floor breaks under him, and he plunges into more molten metal. After that, he's still fine and dandy. He catches up to Arnold's van, punches through the window, and survives the crash. This does beg the question of how an old endoskeleton is this powerful. FNAF composer Leon Riskin implied that the Mimic endoskeleton is made of tungsten, which has the highest melting point of all metals and is exceptionally strong, displaying the animatronic's strength and durability. However, this also makes him very heavy, which we often see leads to his downfall. The Jackie, Big Top, and Dolly segments all have the Mimic losing because he's simply too heavy. Despite that, this power comes in handy with the Mimic's drive to kill its victims. M2 pursues Arnold throughout the MCM facility, and even outside of it to stop him from escaping. As F10 and 4 lets us know, M2 never lets his victims escape his metal clutches.
If you do not, M2 will never pursue.
The animatronic even seems to ignore its surroundings, showing a single-minded focus. In Ruin's scooper ending, as the Mimic is dragged off, it keeps reaching for Cassie. A similar thing happens when it gets caught in the elevator door, although it is smart enough to pull itself free. Afterwards, it intensely watches Cassie, never breaking its focus. This moment is called back in Secret of the Mimic, where its claw gets stuck in Edwin's elevator, yet it keeps reaching for Arnold and banging on the door with its other hand. Then later, the endoskeleton nearly gets crushed by a catwalk, but instead of using both hands to hold it, it spares one to reach for Arnold. And even as it falls, you can see it swiping at him. In the final cutscene, he keeps trying to grab Arnold as his van crashes, really driving home how relentless and single-minded this entity is. In Ruin's normal ending, Gregory even seems worried that the Mimic will come after him.
I know you did it for me, to save me, but we can't risk being followed.
The Mimic's desperate need to get its prey likely stems from how impatient it is. When Cassie is trying to deactivate the security node at the catwalks, M2 complains that she's taking too long.
Well, what are you waiting for? Cassie, you really need to get back on the gator gondola and go to the maintenance room.
Throughout Ruin, there are some other moments of the endoskeleton rushing Cassie, but this one clearly demonstrates just how impatient the Mimic can be. Despite this, he's still intelligent enough to scheme, as any good villain should be. The whole plot of the DLC is that the endoskeleton mimics Gregory to trick Cassie into releasing him. It also uses the Pizzaplex schematics to direct her through the building, and it jams the Nexus entity's signal. So he's quite intelligent. He's also a smart cookie in the Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues. After failing to eliminate the teenagers trapped in the pizza place, he pretends to be someone else trapped in the building, which lures the teens right to him, clearly showing how he can form plans and adapt. Along with being intelligent, he's quite the inventor. As we previously discussed, M2 rebuilt his legs following Edwin's attack. Later in Ruin, we also see that the Mimic's arm appears jagged, and its hands are mismatched, implying that its arm was damaged and its hand broke off, but it replaced it with a new hand. The Mimic's ability to repair itself is further hinted at in the final Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogue, where the main character, Lucia, worries that the endoskeleton might find a way to self-repair. It's also possible that the Mimic's Ruin look is a result of it continuously upgrading itself over time. We'll focus more on that later, along with the proto-mimics. Anyways, not only does M2 repair himself, but he sometimes builds his own appearances. In Ruin, he makes an amalgamation of MCM mascots. Key details of the costume, such as the brown hair, torn off snout, and blue shirt, suggest it was created to resemble Gregory. It even has an orange armband in place of the Faz watch. Considering the endoskeleton is mimicking him throughout the DLC, it makes sense that he would want to look like the boy too. Speculation aside, in most of Secret of the Mimic's endings, he makes an amalgamation of research and development parts, probably as an attempt to scare Arnold. However, it still shows how creative and inventive M2 is. Reading further into the R&D look, this appearance is likely meant to be representation of the Mimic's character at this point in the game. Its identity is an absolute mess. It was a copy of F10 and 4 that was turned into David, then it mimicked Edwin's rage, and since then, it's adapted to Jackie, Big Top, Dolly, Chica, and various other costumes. Now its physical appearance and voice lines are an amalgamation of all sorts of characters, because that's all the Mimic is at this point. It has no true identity. Each of the endings also gives us an indication of the Mimic's character. In the Clock Out ending, your actions don't change anything, so the Mimic simply stands with its arm curled. In the Storytime ending, you reboot him as David, and he curls the tiger plushie to his chest as he goes to sleep, symbolizing that he's comfortable being David and can rest. Finally, in Unfinished Business, he steals the schematics and holds them to his chest as he walks off. This ending is a little bit more vague, but personally, I think it's meant to represent that the Mimic is comfortable with its identity. It's walking away with no costume or persona attached, with the key to rebooting in hand, ensuring no one will ever fix him. This is further implied by its appearance in Ruin. If you look at its chest, you can notice that the box used to reboot it in the Storytime ending is missing, implying that following Secret of the Mimic, the endoskeleton tore it out to make sure that it won't be rebooted as David. So it's clear that by the time of Ruin, the Mimic is fully comfortable with its new identity and doesn't want to be David anymore. In Secret of the Mimic, it seems that M2 still longs for that identity. He talks in David's voice throughout the game, and in the Storytime ending, he willingly becomes David at first, showing that he wanted to go back to being him. But as we discussed, that time is long gone. By Ruin, he's made sure that he stays a monster. He still has some traits from David, such as his childish behavior and arm curl, but outside of that, he's formed his own identity and is comfortable with it. On the note of Ruin, it establishes the Mimic's technological abilities in the games. Throughout the DLC, Cassie's assisted by the digital Helpy character. But upon further inspection, this little guy's actually M2, or at least under his influence. At certain points in the story, his appearance is corrupted. He has veins on his head and orange eyes akin to the Mimic's. It appears that the M2 program has infected the Helpy assistant, using his friendly facade to further its mission of freedom. This establishes that in the games, the Mimic has the ability to infect electronics, which was a very big part of his story and tales. In The Storyteller, the Mimic's AI program was used to generate new stories for the Pizzaplex and its characters. However, it really just infected everything in the building, causing lots of issues. Clearly, controlling electronics is an important part of the Mimic, although it's not clear whether or not we'll see more of this in the future. The books also establish that the Mimic is compatible with VR, AR, and arcades. In the story Tiger Rock, the Mimic even manifests in the Pizzaplex VR booth. While the books are non-canon, this information likely still is, since Glitchtrap appears in those platforms, and the Mex's entity, who is speculated to be F10 and 4, appears in the Pizzaplex's AR network. Moving on, I want to dive into the Mimic's relationship with other characters. While either tricks or murders most people encounters, it does have some more complex feelings about others, the most obvious being Edwin. After being attacked, M2 seems to hold a grudge against him. We find out that the animatronic caused an explosion in Edwin's office and injured his father. Whether or not this attack was intentional or simply a failed power test, M2 doesn't help Edwin. Instead, it mocks him.
I can't move. I can't feel my legs. You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
The Mimic doesn't lift a robotic finger to help his father, clearly showing his disdain for the man who hurt him. He also copies how Edwin told him he was busy, which we saw in Moon.exe.
Respond! Emergency! Call for help! Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Unlike Edwin, we don't know much about M2's thoughts on his mother. In Moon.exe, he asks the moon to bring the sun back, implying that he's fond of F10-4 and possibly that Edwin separated the two. The basement notes suggest that M2 has met her before, as he writes that his family was all together. F10-4 also claims that she watched M2 grow up through the cradle, but that's about all we know. Moon.exe shows her pushing M2 to become David, which could simply be symbolic for her convincing Edwin to make another mimic, or it might imply that F10-4 kept trying to develop M2 after he was created. However, she's absent in the second half of Moon.exe, and the mimic never comments on her during the main gameplay, so perhaps M2 ignores her at that point in the story. However, in Ruin, the mimic strongly dislikes its robot mother, who is transformed from a son to a rabbit. Good for her. But jokes aside, it's strongly implied that the Mex's entity is F10-4. The Mex's machine appears to be a rebranded version of the F10-4 computer, and both the Sun and Mex's have very distinct, sharp facial features. There's also a lot of sun imagery associated with Mex's. If you combine all the security node formations, it creates a sun ray pattern that matches the highlighted rays on F10-4. Some of the Mex's music men also have sun rays and rabbit ears attached, further tying her back to the entity. So, running off the idea that the Mex's entity is an AR version of F10-4, we can clearly see some of the mimic's feelings towards them. Since Mex's has them trapped in the sinkhole, M2 despises them. The whole DLC involves him trying to deactivate the Mex's security, and at one point, he activates a signal jammer to stop them from pursuing Cassie. This is visualized by a digital firewall engulfing Mex's, possibly designed by M2 as a reminder of the real Fiona's fiery death. So it seems that at first, M2 liked F10-4, but by Ruin, he clearly despises Mex's for keeping him trapped. Diving back into Secret of the Mimic, M2 is quite fond of the Springlock Captain mascot. Sometimes, when you encounter the Mimic while wearing the suit, he'll wave at you, implying he likes the Captain. You could argue that he's messing with Arnold, but F10-4 says that M2 can't see him in the Springlock suits, so I don't think the endoskeleton is taunting him. The Mimic also doesn't care about the other Springlock characters. Upon approaching the Fazbear Springlocks, it simply looks into the suit before walking off. So it's clear that he isn't a fan of every costume, just the Captain. As to why M2 would like him, you can find a blueprint of him in his lair. So perhaps he waves at the character since he recognizes him. Or maybe since he was fond of the Captain, he brought the print into his lair. The blueprint also doesn't seem to be a random detail. In the game's original release, it depicted Jugband Hippo, but an update changed it to the Captain. So this does seem to be an intentional inclusion. Regardless, I don't think it's very important. It's just interesting to see how the Mimic is fond of certain characters. Now that we know a lot about M2's personality and his relationship with others, let's speculate on what this endoskeleton's ultimate goal is. Because despite his ruthless, violent behavior, he does seem to have a plan besides revenge and freedom. In the unfinished business ending, we see him stealing the data diver with the Mimic schematics, raising the question of what he has planned. It's possible that M2 simply wants to prevent more Mimics from being produced, or perhaps, building off how he seems to like being himself, maybe he stole the data diver to stop anyone from repairing him. However, that seems unlikely, as in this ending, Arnold can't repair him. A more likely possibility is that the animatronic is looking to upgrade itself. His ruined body is clearly a much more developed version of the framework seen in Secret of the Mimic. And while in the books, we know that Fazbear upgraded the endoskeleton, in the games, it's unclear. I think it's likely that his look in Ruin is the result of M2 upgrading itself with new parts. His body even resembles the prototype animatronics from Secret of the Mimic. The endoskeleton's eyebrows are taken from Mr. Cupcake, its eyes from Foxy, and the telescope arms seem to be Freddy's. So perhaps after M2 obtained the Mimic schematics, he returned to the remains of MCM and salvaged parts to build a new body. However, another possibility is that M2 wants to develop more Mimics, not to make an army, but to fulfill its original purpose of bringing David back. Despite no longer viewing itself as David, the animatronic still clearly sees him as a friend. Throughout Moon.exe, M2 is accompanied by an owl who represents David. M2 feeds, pets, talks, and sings with the owl. But the sun kills him and makes M2 a baby owl mask, representing how F10-4 want him to be David, and possibly that she killed the child. When you obtain the owl mask, she says, "You have your reward and your sacrifice," implying that to make M2, she had to sacrifice David. Anyways, you can talk to an oak tree who tells M2 that the owl's gone, which upsets him. This shows that the loss of David does impact M2. His fondness for the boy likely comes from being a copy of M1 who actually knew David. Later in the Moon's Cave, you discover a statue of the baby owl. When interacting with it, the game says, you will bring him back no matter the cost. This could be referring to M2 mimicking David, but later in Secret of the Mimic's Unfinished Business ending, we're introduced to the Proto-Mimics, who are a group of animatronics built out of scrap. Judging from their eyes and hostile behavior, it looks like these are copies of M2, and based on his vow to bring David back, we can reasonably assume that these guys are attempts to make a successful mimic of David. Originally, I believe these were the mimic copies that Edwin mentioned, but just look at them. Edwin wouldn't build scrappy robots like this. Compare them to the rest of his actual creations. We also know that the mimic is very inventive, so it's not too far-fetched to assume that he built some trash bots. But despite his efforts, they're all mindless monsters, making these inventions failures like M2 himself. The endoskeleton might have stolen the mimic schematics to help him succeed in creating a mimic of David. Some people also think that Gregory from Security Breach is an attempt at making another David. It's implied that he was brainwashed by Glitchtrap/M2, considering that he helps the anomaly take over the Pizzaplex and silence anyone who gets too close to the truth. We discussed this theory in a video a while back, but M2 might have abducted Gregory to mold him to another David. The boys look very similar too. They're both white with wavy brown hair. The trap may have specifically chosen to infect Gregory due to his similar appearance to David. This would imply that he's given up making a robot child, realizing that a human would be the best way to bring him back. For now, this is all I have to say about the Mimic's characterization. He's such an interesting and tragic character. There's so much to read into and analyze in his story. I hope this video has given you a clear insight into his robotic brain, and convinced you that the Mimic is much more than a malfunctioning machine. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and joining our monthly membership. It helps support us, and you'll receive a range of cool perks, including shoutouts in our videos, custom emojis, badges next to your name, exclusive previews of upcoming projects, and more. Special thanks to our members Shaun Du Tout, Exoree, and ShadowFreddyGamerYT. And thanks to you for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos.